Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started again. This time, I'm not going to call out and shame anyone in the audience who may still be talking, but you all can do that later at lunchtime. But we want to make sure we know both of our panelists here are off to other things right after this, and so we want to be respectful of their time. So we're going to get started with our third panel. We'll have our panelists take the stage right now. Please go ahead. Our panel focused on the Democratic agenda with Representatives Gina Hinojosa and Representative Aaron Zwiener, and our moderator, Rebecca Allen. So let's just do quick introductions here. Born and raised in Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, Representative Gina Hinojosa proudly represents Central Austin and her alma mater, University of Texas, in the Texas State House. She sits on the House Public Education Committee, the House Business and Industry Committee, and the House Select Committee on Educational Opportunity and Enrichment. Representative Aaron Zwiener, Democrat of Driftwood, is an author, educator, and conservationist who's currently serving her third term in the Texas House of Representatives, serves on the House Committees on Natural Resources, House Administration, and Energy Resources, also a member of the House Democratic Caucus, LGBTQ Caucus, Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, and a number of others that I don't have time to name, but including Women's Health, Texas Water, and IT. Our moderator, Rebecca Allen, is the Texas Tribune's managing editor of Enterprise and Politics. Before joining the Texas Tribune in 2019, she was a state government reporter for the Dallas Morning News. With that, I turn the program over to Rebecca.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here, and thank y'all for being here. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. I'm going to start a little bit on a down note for the Democrats, and frankly, if there is an up note for the party, you guys help me find it, okay? So I'm going to tell you a lot of things that you already know. We are a month out from the election where Republicans swept the White House, Congress, down ballot elections. In Texas, we saw a stronger than expected performance polling wise from Ted Cruz over Colin Allred. Trump widened his margin of success in Texas compared to his past elections here. Democrats lost 2 seats in the House. They lost a seat in the Senate. The Valley went red historically. We saw places in districts in South Texas go for Trump that have never gone Republican. It's been a month. So I want to talk about that for a minute because that performance is going to underpin a lot of what we see in the next legislative session. I mean, first of all, how are you? And was that surprising to you? You were at the convention, and there was just so much optimism, and the narrative was that Democrats have the wind at their back. I'm curious, were you surprised, or did you see the writing on the wall?
I was surprised, like most people in this country. The polling was so off nationally, statewide, and that really is the scariest part to me, is that we were so unprepared for what was coming. We didn't see it coming. Now, I'll say this, the polling was way off, but when you went and knocked on doors, when we were out in the field, everybody was saying, it doesn't feel good, right? So people with their pulse on the community came back with different results than what we were hearing in the polling. But, when you have the Iowa poll being over 10, I think it was 17 points off, the poll that's never wrong, right? Something is really wrong with our modeling nationwide, and so I did not see it coming. Of course, for our House races, so we lost one. We expected it was going to be hard to keep in the Laredo-Uvalde area that has been trending away from us for several election cycles. And also, we lost one in Corpus. That one I did not see coming. We had opportunities. We had some great candidates running across this state, and we just had no coattails. In fact, we had the national ticket weighing us down, right? Just like every other state did. And so we had a lot to contend with. We don't get national investment as swing states do across this country because Texas is big and intimidating. And so it was really hard to withstand that national red wave.
Yeah. First, I want to compliment Texas Tribune for having the most skirt-friendly living room style chairs I've
We
sat
pride
in
ourselves on that.
in my entire life. I am so much more comfortable sitting on this stage than I am used to being. But I really echo what Representative Hinojosa said. On one hand, I think that optimism was real and there was so much energy, and we did see a lot of really good Democratic turnout, but not what we needed and not where we needed it. And I think the thing that is so hard for us to keep underestimating, but we've underestimated it twice now, is that Donald Trump has his own base that comes out when Donald Trump is on the ticket. I saw that in my 2020 reelection when my margin narrowed significantly and largely driven by the more rural parts of my district, just having Republican turnout skyrocket and people who'd never voted for come out to vote for Donald Trump and then vote for every other Republican down the ballot. And then at the same time, we had moderate Republicans coming out to vote for Joe Biden in 2020 and voting for every other Republican down the ballot. And we got a major 1-2 punch in our state legislative races that year. And I think we saw a similar dynamic this year where we had some moderates coming out to vote for Kamala, but still vote for other Republicans. And then we also had that Trump base come out in numbers. The other thing I really just don't think we can underestimate is, what this sort of sense of malaise about the economy has on us. And that's, as I know Representative Hinojosa has discussed, that was an international dynamic, this anti-incumbent moment. And, I don't think we did a good enough job standing up and saying that it is a goddamn miracle that the Biden administration landed the economy after COVID without a worldwide depression. And full on, that was an economic miracle. This should have been so much harder. But it's hard to look at somebody who's struggling with costs and talk them through that. And we didn't find that path. I don't know if we could have found that path, but we didn't find it. And I think that's our big challenge going forward, is helping people connect what happens now to the policies that are coming. If we see things like tariffs, it is not going to help affordability for people, and we have to remind them of that. And it felt like again and again we were talking to folks who they were comparing how they felt right before COVID to how they felt now. And of course, the Biden ticket, the Kamala ticket, the Biden administration, we're going to lose that comparison. Life felt better before COVID. And so we've got to make sure we have that broad economic message to supplement the social message where people do agree with us more than not. But a little bit of bright spot I do want to mention is we saw a lot of far right school board candidates fail in Texas. And we saw folks who support our public school systems and inclusive public schools succeed. In fact, in my neck of the woods, we had the first inclusive school board member elected to Wimberley ISD in 5 or 6 years. And so I'm hanging on to some of those bright spots. And the other bright spot I'm hanging on to is historical, which is that Donald Trump won in 2016, and I and 11 other people flipped seats in the Texas House. We flipped 2 state Senate seats. We flipped 2 congressional seats in 2018. And so I think we're in the middle of building that, or using that same roadmap again in 2026.
I will say that is the bright spot. The bright spot is last time we had a backlash 2 years later to Trump, and we will be prepared for that opportunity this time around.
I mean, given the margins, I'm wondering if you feel like there is a cultural shift to acknowledge. And I'm wondering, if this changes just sort of your strategy or priorities. I mean, certainly Republicans are going to say, we have a mandate. And we are pushing policies, very conservative policies that are reflective of what voters want. Because look at the last couple of legislative sessions, incredibly conservative policies, and it has been answered with, a resounding yes for Republicans in Texas. So do they have a point, and how do you reconcile with that strategically?
I don't think there is a mandate for their policies. there's a lot of identity politics at play here, but when you saw nationwide, when you looked at abortion referendum, when you looked at vouchers, those things overwhelmingly demonstrated that Americans are on our side on those things. So I think it's a mistake for them to decide that they have a mandate on policies. And look, things are very divided, very volatile in politics right now. And so it would be a mistake to overplay their hand. I think they would be setting themselves up for a backlash like last time as well. Our takeaway as Democrats, in my mind, is that we do need to focus, to Representative Zwiener's point, on economics and the economic opportunities that Texans and that Americans are expecting in this time when it's harder for people to afford their first time home, in a time when the middle class lifestyle is so out of reach for young people. We need to speak to that. The Biden administration did work miracles with respect to the economy. They weren't the best at articulating them to the American people, and we need to do better about finding a message that resonates, that speaks to that concern. To say, well, the economy's better, it's so much better, did not speak to that concern. It was dismissive of the pain that people feel economically, and we need to be better about addressing it.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Representative Hinojosa said. I'll add, if there's a mandate, it's a mandate on vibes. It's really not on policy. And the number I keep thinking about, and it's actually why I filed legislation to allow Texans to bring ballot measures to the ballot themselves, is Florida, the abortion referendum or ballot initiative getting 57% of the vote, and Donald Trump getting 56% of the vote. And from a pure policy perspective, that clearly doesn't add up. We all know that doesn't add up. So the two possibilities are, one, people are really struggling to connect policies to who they're actually voting for, or the other thing is that general malaise is outweighing that. I think it's a combination of both, and we really have to struggle to break through that. And every single day we're in the session, we've got to connect the policy outcomes people are experiencing and usually not appreciating on the ground to the people running the state of Texas.
The final thing I want to say about what this election opened our eyes to is that the reality that people are consuming on the far right is very different from the reality we are consuming, and it's all about algorithms on social media, and I'm not even sure exactly what people who voted for Trump are hearing and knowing, and so we're having to understand, how do we reach people given that major news sources aren't what everybody is consuming now, and that news sources are so, there's a lot of fake news out there, and they're specifically targeted at people. So I think that's the dilemma of news sources. It's a dilemma of Americans, right? How are we going to deal with that? It's a very real threat to this country, and I think we're just at the point of still trying to figure out how we deal with that.
So just going back to your comments about focusing on the economy and kitchen table issues, sort of the other side of that coin is that Democrats perhaps were spending too much time talking about identity politics. In particular, we've seen a lot of hindsight conversations about transgender rights and debates over transgender issues. Representative Hinojosa, I hate to put you on the spot. I would have asked this question, whoever was here, but former Texas Democratic Party Chair Gilberto Hinojosa, who's your father, created a little stir when he told a reporter that transgender issues may be hurting Democrats and may be a liability. He later apologized for that comment, but I wanted to just get your take on, he's not the only one saying that. Vicente Gonzalez recently told a Texas Tribune reporter, Matthew Choi, that along the same things, we're seeing this conversation bubble up at different levels. And I'm curious how you guys feel about that that notion that that's something that Democrats need to maybe distance themselves from.
So to be clear, the issue of trans rights is not an issue that Democrats keep hammering on. What ends up happening both in Texas and in Congress in D.C. is Republicans, bless you, set up Democrats with these non-issues, right? And they'll throw up amendments on major legislation that targets the trans community. And Democrats are the party of defending civil rights, and we should not shy away from that. I think what we can do a better job of is saying we defend the rights of all people, all our people, because an attack on one is an attack on all, and understand why they're attacking this vulnerable community, because they're trying to distract from the corruption of the Republicans who control the state of Texas right now. For example, do you know that since 2020, because of COVID, the governor has passed every month executive orders that wipe away legal requirements to put out competitive bids on major projects. That whole thing in Eagle Pass, that military base that he's creating, those were no bid contracts. And this stuff has been happening every month with executive orders issued every month since 2020. This is paid back to his donors. Maybe it's legal. I guess it's legal, but it is corruption. And that is what they're trying to distract from. Leadership that has no solutions, and that at its core is corrupt.
Yeah, I agree with everything Representative Hinojosa said. And the other thing I'll add is, one, our job as leaders is not just to do the most popular thing and do the most expedient things for elections. We have duties beyond that. And winning elections is part of our job as people who want to push our values, but helping move the conversation forward is also part of our jobs. And for me, leaving the trans community behind is just completely unacceptable. And it's something, as a community, I will always stand up for every single day. Now, I do think there is a tone dynamic that Democrats need to get better at. And it's really frustrating to be told we need to work on our tone. It's really frustrating. I hate it, but we need to work on our tone. And I actually look back to, Beto O'Rourke, who is one of the best retail politicians who's probably ever been born. And I've talked to some people who've been like, he flip-flopped all the time. And I'm like, no, he didn't. He just showed up and met people where they were at. And he had a conversation with people based on how they felt at the moment, and started with them there and then helped build towards why he supported what he did. And I think those of us who are working to get votes for Democrats need to approach our conversations about trans issues that way right now. We need to not respond to people with, how on earth could you believe that? We need to respond with, interesting, why do you think that? Can I help give you some more information that informs that? Because full stop, the negative feelings people are having about the trans community are based on outright lies. Outright lies about what gender-affirming care looks like. And they're hitting people's fear button using those lies. And we are not going to be able to unravel that overnight. And I also think it's intrinsically tied to the economic issues. We are entering a moral panic in this country. And when people retreat to moral panics is when they are anxious about the economic dynamic. And so we address both of these together by moving forward as a community, hearing people where they're at and building bridges with them and inviting them to learn and join us.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about the upcoming session a little bit more directly. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the speaker race. It's kind of this foregone conclusion that if Dade Phelan wins a re-election to speaker, that he has to do it with the Democratic support. Is that the case in y'all's mind? And I'm curious, have you guys just separately heard of Republicans reaching out to Democrats, like trying to harden their support?
Yeah, of course, if Dade Phelan is reelected Speaker, he'll do it with Democratic support. There is not a person in the state of Texas who can be elected Speaker of the House without Democratic support. The Republican coalition is fighting within itself. The anti-Dade Phelan portion of the Republican coalition is fighting within themselves. They cannot get to 76 as a caucus. They need us, and every single one of them knows that, regardless of whatever game they're playing on social media and in the press right now.
Has anybody reached out to Democrats that you've been hearing? Or?
Yes, no, definitely, and I'm not going to name names right now, but yes, even the folks who are like, oh my goodness, we don't want to work with Democrats, have been reaching out to Democrats.
I mean, do you think it's in the Democrats' best interest to get behind Phelan still? I mean, do you guys still see him as like y'all's guy? Is he? I mean, like under Dade Phelan's watch, the legislature has passed some of the most conservative bills we've seen in modern history. I mean, with permitless carry, banning abortions with no exceptions, the bills targeting trans healthcare, DEI, election restrictions that you guys walked out over. I mean, what do Democrats get out of aligning with Phelan at this point?
I can start. It was real funny after last session when we started hearing this line that Democrats ran the Texas House, because we wouldn't have done any of that. We had our own plans that I think Texas would have liked a lot better. And that's not what we saw come out of that building. The interesting thing about being a member of the minority party while the majority party has a fight is people are like, ooh, that's a lot of opportunity for y'all. And I'm like, you don't understand. They're fighting over who can kick us better. And I think we're all going to make our speaker dynamics for reasons we're probably not going to put on microphones very loudly here. But, our job is to figure out how we make sure they do the least harm. And I can say that's what every single one of our caucus members are focused on. And I think the best thing we can do to that end is sit real tight and let them fight it out and then see what the landscape looks like and how we want to get engaged.
I agree completely with that answer. Dade Phelan, I really hate the term conservative to define what the Texas legislature has done in the last several sessions. It's radical right policies that they have passed. So no, these are not policies that are friendly to our agenda or to the people of Texas. And there's not a reason to think he is our guy. At this point, we're watching and waiting and seeing where our best opportunity is.
What about y'all's own leadership race? We have an election coming up this afternoon, and I'm curious, who are you going to be backing?
Well, I don't know who I'm going to be backing. In all honesty, I have not pledged my support to anybody, and that is still an ongoing conversation as well for me.
Yeah, I thought you were joking when I said I thought you were going to ask that question, and you said
a great
yes.
idea.
My lesson learned. But no, I do know who I'll be supporting. I'm not going to say their name on the microphone here. And the biggest reason why is the most important thing for us as a caucus right now is to be united as we go into this speaker dynamic. And the thing I was at dinner with all three of the announced House Democratic Caucus Chair candidates last night. And y'all, I have never seen a friendlier dinner with that many people running against each other at it. And what I appreciate about every single person in that race right now is they know the most important thing is that we remain united as a caucus, and they've all been committed to running in a way where we can all, after this vote today, stand together and feel good about it.
And I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that the three candidates who are named at this point are Trey Martinez-Fisher, who is currently the chair, John Bryant and Jean Wu, who are both Progressive Caucus members, correct me if I'm wrong. So I guess without naming who you're supporting, I guess I'm just curious, do you see or are you hopeful that leadership takes the caucus in a different direction? Do you guys feel like strategically we need a shift in priorities or in strategy?
I wouldn't say we need a shift. I think what we need is a leader who's prepared to meet the moment, and that moment is fluid. So those conversations, and we all want the same thing, right? A lot of this is difference in style more than substance. And to Representative Sweener's point, in the end, we'll need to be unified to have the best chance of protecting our people, moving our agenda, or protecting our agenda. So the hearing from caucus leader candidates what their plans are, how they are prepared, and how they've demonstrated that in the past is important. And look, we have an embarrassment of riches with 3 great candidates running, so it's hard. It's a hard decision, and in the end, I have no doubt that we'll come together to be a powerful force, a powerful minority in the Texas House.
Yeah, I think, again, with embarrassment of riches, every single person running is somebody who, if this legislative session goes real sideways, can be an effective leader as all the proverbial shit hits the fan. They are all people who can go to the mat and fight with us. And I think that's good, because I think there's a non-zero chance of that happening. But the biggest things I'm thinking about is, really how we operate as a team, and who I really think can bring everybody together and make sure we're operating as the most unified whole we possibly can. Because when you're in the minority, you got to hang together, or you will hang separately.
So, pivoting, what do you guys think happens to vouchers this year? I mean, is that a foregone conclusion? Is that a done deal? Abbott has kind of declared victory on that since he's gotten. He had a pretty successful primary run. He says that he's got the votes. Representative Zwiener, what do you think?
Having the votes to pass a voucher plan is different from having the votes to pass the voucher plan he wants. And I think there's going to be a lot of devil in the details. So while I'm absolutely concerned about those election results and the numbers, I think there's a lot of people whose voucher votes don't come without a whole lot of money for public education. And I think there's some people who don't want to vote for vouchers with a whole lot of money for public education. They want vouchers without the extra money. And so I think those internal Republican tensions are going to be a huge challenge for them.
And just to recap, last year, what ended up happening was there was no new money put into public schools, even though we were sitting on a historic surplus. And so because the governor threatened that if we did not pass vouchers, that he would veto any public education spending bill. So the House complied, did not pass a separate school funding bill to put in more money into our schools, and we did not pass vouchers despite repeated special sessions on the issue. Now, the difference this time around is, yes, there is a concern about the numbers, but we all anticipate the governor's going to be on the ballot next election, and it's going to be a lot harder for him to run for re-election without putting more money into our public schools, given the dire situation so many of our public schools are facing right now. In Austin, we just had to increase taxes to meet basic necessities for our public schools, when had we increased the basic allotment just to make up for inflation at the statewide level, we would have brought in a lot more money. So your taxes went up because we didn't do our job at the state. Austin property owners' taxes went up, and this happened all over the state. Texans are angry about this, and this needs to be addressed. The other thing is, we've had the benefit of time to see how these vouchers have played out across the country and how they've blown up budgets. Arizona is one example. And so with more information, it's harder to make the case for a universal voucher that'll cost somewhere like $5 billion when you look at just within the next decade, because it's expected to grow about 5%, a universal voucher every year, to where we'd be spending $5 billion a biennium at the end of a decade, which is astronomical, right? In a state where we're already looking at major expenses, water infrastructure, all sorts of things that we need to invest in just for this session alone, and people trying to kind of thinking where are we going to get the money to do basics in this state? To think about we'd have that kind of commitment to of expenditures in the out years is pretty irresponsible. So to Representative Sweeney's point, the devil's in the details. It's going to be hard to thread the needle.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll add on that is, one of my districts had to get rid of behavioral health specialists in most of their schools. They had expanded that as we had, increased calls to focus on mental health in schools, increased behavioral issues after COVID, and that was so painful for them and something that the school board's constituents were furious about. And we have that dynamic repeating all across the state. People have been feeling that pinch. And I have to say, the biggest mistake we made as a House, the Democratic caucus did not make this mistake. Representative Hinojosa personally worked her tail off to try to make this happen, is we had an opportunity to send more money for schools to the governor's desk. It was a bill that was already through the Senate. If we passed it out of the House, it would have gone straight to the governor. And he told us he was going to veto it, and we should have made him. That is the biggest mistake we made. We have a governor who has been grabbing power and bullying the legislature, and it is going to continue until we stand up to him and make him make some hard choices and do some things that the people of Texas aren't going to appreciate instead of bullying us behind the scenes.
One final thing I want to add about this voucher conversation is Texas is one of the few states that doesn't have automatic increases to the teacher retirement system. So when we got our first voucher bill, universal voucher bill from the Senate, there was a fiscal note on it that if you read through was very interesting because there was an actuarial analysis that said if there is a decrease in the amount of teachers that are in the system, even by, it was a minuscule percentage, it could destabilize the whole teacher retirement system. So just to be clear, right, we need teachers paying in to pay for the teachers that retire. And when we are putting money into a private school system that is paying for teachers that aren't paying in to the teacher retirement system, we're in trouble. Last time around, retired teachers were very busy making sure their constitutional amendment got passed. This time around, I think all teachers and all retired teachers need to understand what that means for the teacher retirement system going forward.
So strategically going forward, I mean, like, are there any cards left to play? I mean, does it seem like the best move at this point, like from your camp, is to try to just get to maximize the amount of money you guys can get for public schools out of the deal, or to try to get like a different version of a voucher program that's maybe not universal? Is there a version of vouchers that is like more satisfying to you, or that you guys perhaps were like trying to negotiate around in the last legislative session?
No. In the last legislative session, no. I mean, we all held strong against vouchers because ultimately the harm that it would do, I believe it would destroy our public school system. Already, we are one of the least funded, probably bottom 3 at this point, states in the whole nation when it comes to per student funding. We would not have the money to sustain our public school system with a voucher, and it is an existential threat to our public schools. So no, last session, no. This session is a new session. I still feel strongly that the threat is as dire, and we will have to look for opportunities and negotiate accordingly.
I fully agree with Representative Hinojosa, and if a voucher bill is coming down the pike, we're going to try and get the voucher program the closest to zero we can. And we're going to try and get the school funding. I'm sure there's a limit to how much more money our schools need, but I'm pretty sure the GOP will not reach our limit. So we'll be pushing for the most money we can. I mean, I think the other conversation we will have if a voucher bill is coming down the pike is trying to get as many guardrails as possible as well. And I think a big one is accountability. And it's an interesting thing because, when I talk to folks who are, voucher curious, a lot of times it's driven by frustration with testing in public schools. And I try to remind folks there is nothing magic about private, and you could be reaching out to your legislators asking for them to get rid of a punitive testing system. And so anything somebody is saying is better about private schools is something we have the ability to do in our public schools. And that's where we should be focused instead of trying to create a parallel system.
Let's talk about the border a little bit. I mean, obviously, with a Trump administration coming in, we expect a lot of activity around border security to ramp up in Texas, and Governor Abbott and the land commissioner have made it very clear that they are going to be, willing partners to the federal government. I guess I'm curious where you guys see the Democratic Party in the legislature. Like, what can you do there? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how sort of voter attitudes and polling around immigration will play into that. I mean, Abbott's policies were overwhelmingly popular in polling, and again, we've seen Republicans do very well along in border communities that were historically Republican. Tell me how that's how you guys are feeling about that going into session.
The advantage we have is we have members of our caucus that are from those communities, right? And they are the experts when it comes to border policy. And let me give an example. Last December, I got a call from Eddie Morales, who is our representative out of Eagle Pass. And I'm from a border town. I'm from Brownsville. I haven't lived there since 92. But he called and he said, hey, Gina, this is crazy. They've shut down the border. This was the week of Christmas. And, in Austin, we're not impacted. We don't see the impact of the border, but I knew enough to know you cannot shut down the international border the week of Christmas, because that is the busiest commerce time, right, of the whole year. And so we asked the Biden administration, can we all get on a Zoom call? And you were probably on that call. We had Biden administration officials, top level Biden administration officials, where we were expressing our concern of inaction to make sure that the border was functioning, right? It was short. It was really right after that negotiations happened between the Biden administration and Mexican officials, and we saw the Mexican government really implement policies to keep migrants from reaching the border. And we've seen crossings plummet in this country along the border. And so I think one of our best approaches to border policy is to listen to our members who are from the border, who are the experts on what is happening there. We will always be a party that defends human rights, right? I mean, that has to be foremost in our policy positions there. I'm not sure we know exactly what they're going to bring this session, but making sure that we're always defending human rights, children's rights, and also that we're listening to our people who have expert knowledge on this is going to be important to our policies going forward.
Yeah, I think it's another issue where we have to be pretty intentional about meeting people where they're at and having conversations. And the challenge with the border dynamic is that there are real problems. Now, those problems ebb and flow, and the scale to which those problems are existing at and what exactly those problems are don't always match the narrative, and we see this dynamic where border crossings drop, and then to keep border in the news, we see Governor Abbott release an executive order instructing hospitals to ask people about their citizenship status. There is this strategic dynamic happening in the GOP to keep the issue in the news because they believe it helps them. And it is divorced from reality. Again, there's sometimes pieces of reality in it, but they're trying to push a narrative that isn't entirely real. And the even more frustrating element is at the federal level, we've seen a lot of effort to exacerbate the problem and make sure it stays a challenge because they believe they electorally benefit from that. But that just took me like 30 seconds to explain, which does not fit well in a political commercial. And so it really is one of those issues we've got to keep working with folks to unpack. And I think is one of the hardest issues for us to figure out how to talk about successfully in a political context. Now, policy-wise in Texas, one of the things I want to be talking about next session is the Republican narrative for the last few cycles has been Joe Biden's been letting all of these folks over the border, so we need to send billions of your taxpayer money to the border to stop that. Supposedly, they just got what they wanted, and we have Donald Trump as president. I would like our money back. I would like the state of Texas to quit spending billions of dollars at the border, and I would like us to put that money somewhere that matters, like infrastructure or our public schools. And I think we need to keep that pressure on this session.
So do you feel like with the Trump administration's backing, you have an opportunity to end state funding for Operation Lone Star?
I think it is very, very hard for Republican leadership in this state to defend Operation Lone Star now that Trump is in office.
Interesting. Well, let's. If you guys want to start lining up, we'll take some audience questions if anybody has any. I'll just ask one last question on my part. I started this by talking about like it's kind of like a demoralizing time for Democrats right now who are on the losing end of a lot of things, and I'm just wondering, like, what are you telling voters who are sort of disengaging from politics or who are feeling like sort of like hopelessness about, especially in Texas, right? Like, since I've been here, the narrative has kind of persistently been like the state is like just teetering on the edge of like being purple, and as I've lived here, it's gotten further and further red electorally. So, what is your message to those who you're trying to keep in the tent?
I don't think it's gotten further and further red. I think this election cycle, yes, was alarming what happened. What I'm telling people is, look, we're still trying to understand everything, the results of this election. We didn't see this coming. And I'll tell you, for instance, in our House races, precinct level data is not out until January. So we're still processing that. And I think it's important that we take the time to fully understand. But meanwhile, what's also important is that we strengthen. I came into politics through a group called Austin Interfaith that was all about organizing. And that's about strengthening our relationships with one another, because in the end, we're going to need to rely on those relations. First, that's a good thing, right? We know the Biden administration has initiative on loneliness because there's a loneliness epidemic in this country. So it's nourishing and it's good for us. But also in the end, we'll need each other. But we'll need real connections, real relationships. If we're going to counter misinformation and the nastiness on social media, we'll need real community as opposed to, Twitter community to combat what is happening there.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk that like Democrats are not as organized to push back against Trump this cycle, and I really think that's wrong. I think what we saw in 2016 was this sort of shock and a bunch of people opting in to do the real work of politics for the first time and being very loud as they tried to figure that out. Going into this round of Trump as president, I think people have found their work and they don't need to go have a march about it as much. They don't need to go have a Twitter thread about it. They know what their work is and they're plugging back into that work, whether that work is community support, whether that work is political dynamics. And so what I see across my community is people plugging back into that. And now there are some folks out there who have not yet found their work. And I think our job as leaders is to remind them that's available and to please join. Again, 2016, we had the Trump election. We had not great results across the state of Texas. And 2018, we had amazing results that completely changed the way the Texas House operated for a cycle because they were real scared of Democrats, and that was nice. We have that playbook to play again. And the other piece of that dynamic is 2018 was near the end of a redistricting cycle, which meant the gerrymander had started to break. And after the 2020 election, we got re-gerrymandered, and those numbers matter. Some of the seats we've lost are seats that were intentionally gerrymandered to minimize the number of Democratic voters in them, one in the Valley, one in Bexar County. So in 2026, 2028, 2030, that gerrymander is not going to hold up as well as it did this cycle and last cycle. And we've got to do the work and prepare to hang every unpopular policy decision around their neck. And I need everyone who supports those values to be a part of that.
All right, so we'll get started with Q&A, and I know that both representatives need to get on the road soon, so I want to make sure we get to as many questions in the next 11 minutes as possible, but I also want to ask some questions from online. Linda from Driftwood asks, what will it take to get a statewide referendum on women's health care like Kansas?
The problem in Texas is we do not have direct ballot initiative. So you cannot, as citizens, petition the state of Texas to allow a vote on that. When Texans get to vote on things, it is because the legislature decided you could. And to be clear, that's actually what happened in Kansas. The Kansas ballot initiative was about trying to overturn pro-abortion language in their constitution, and Kansas voters stood up and said, no, we like our constitution. So we don't have a path to put it directly there, but I would really encourage Texans to support citizen ballot initiatives because I think it's time. I think we've seen them be successful in other states. I've filed legislation for that. Senator Nate Johnson has filed legislation for that. And that's how we get that direct access.
Yeah, my name is Bill Hammond, and I wanted to ask you about INR as well. Is there a polling that you're aware of the citizens of Texas on that issue? Is there legislative history? Has it been tried before? Are all the Republicans no because what you want to do with your ballot initiative? And if I can, a separate issue, and I'm sure you have a solution to skyrocketing home insurance rates. So there's two for you guys. Thank you.
I am not aware of any polling on the issue. It's the first time I've carried the legislation. It's actually something I had mixed feelings about, and the Florida results pushed me over the edge and made me a supporter. I know Senator Johnson has carried it before, and I look forward to having conversations with him about it. I do not serve on the insurance committee and do not have deep knowledge there, but one thing I will say is we need to quit pretending that climate change is not one of the drivers of rising home insurance rates and taking more active steps to try and reduce these extreme weather events that are taking lives and damaging property.
Do you think all the R's are no on INR?
I'd suspect so, but I'd love to push him on it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tim Kaminsky, and I'm with the Texas Licensed Child Care Association. I also operate child care centers in Fort Bend County. For the last couple of years, the child care industry has been supported by the federal funds that came through the ARPA funds to help keep us open. Since the beginning of COVID, right before COVID, we had over 18,000 licensed child care centers in the state. That dropped down to 6,000 in May of 2020, and we're only back up to 14,000 at this point. We're anticipating at least 30 to 40% of those closing this next year because no additional funding was put in towards child care in the last legislative session. Phelan put child care as part of the interim charges. He's also put it as part of one of the groups to form to look at this before y'all go into session. Have either of you gotten involved in that project, and where do you see things happening with child care this session?
Unfortunately, neither of us are on that work group. We passed a local initiative here in Travis County to invest in childcare. Unfortunately, we've had to do a lot of those kinds of things locally because the state has been asleep at the wheel or actively making it harder for these basic supports for our families. But I agree with you. It's a major issue, and I hear about it all the time. And I'll be looking to support legislation that's filed on it to increase funding.
My name's Craig Campbell. I'm with the Austin Retired Teachers Association, and I appreciate your comments about the impact of vouchers on the TRS fund, and I think it really is a threat to that, and I hope that gets out there and gets published and pushed a lot more. My question on the vouchers is, could we have it where foster children automatically get into voucher programs because they don't have parents to ask for them?
There was a bill filed last session by James Frank, who that prioritized foster care kids in that program, in a voucher program. So that is possible. We would see that.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for being here. My name is Yulisa. So I want to bring it back to the federal national level, if possible. So it goes without saying that President Donald Trump won't be allowed to run another term as president. And so
I hope
Does
that's
it
true.
go without
I-
saying?
So I'm speaking words of power, theoretically. So with that being said, I wanted to ask both of you if you can gauge of anyone you would consider to be a strong candidate for this next presidential election in the Democratic Party. And if you can't say a name, then what are the qualities this theoretical person should champion, or what should they do differently than what Kamala Harris did?
One interesting thing about what happened this election cycle on the Democratic side was that we learned we have a pretty strong bench of candidates for the highest office. And so I would have been happy with almost any of them, really. I do think running on economic opportunity won't be important for Democrats at the national level and state level. I want to give a kind of shout out to some members who have already filed some bills locally that I think are important and speak to that. Representative Richard Raymond has filed a bill that there should a constitutional amendment to have no increases in the sales tax, right? I think that's really important because some of us believe that Republicans are looking to increase the sales tax, which we know is the most inequitable increase in tax that we could have in the state of Texas. Christina Morales, representative out of Houston, filed a bill to make college free for all Texans at all our state schools. We see UT just passed a strong initiative to do that, but really for so many families, college is out of reach, and it's an opportunity that Texas families are looking to try to afford, and so we need to make sure we're speaking to those needs directly.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say is the main reason Kamala Harris was not a good presidential candidate is because she was Joe Biden's vice president in a year with incredible anti-incumbent dynamics. And that was unfortunate, the way that played out. But that is like the biggest mistake she made, was being in that role, which was obviously impossible to reverse at that point. I think there's a lot of people nationwide I'm excited about, but one thing I think we should remember as Democrats is we tend to do well with people who feel fresh and are not overexposed. And so I would encourage people who are going to run to not overexpose themselves too early and then come out to be the next fun, exciting candidate.
Thank you both for being here and enlightening us. It's been a wonderful presentation. My name is Randy Lee. I've been hanging around up there at the Capitol since 1975. I have a trivia question, actually, for Representative Zwiener. Is it true that you're a former Jeopardy champion?
3-time, right?
I am not advised.
Now, and if so, what years?
2012 was the year I appeared on the show.
I just wanted people to know that we have a very smart representative.
We're going to close this out with one last question here.
Hi, Reagan Stone with Progress Texas here, and hopefully this helps round everything out. But to my count, there's about 3 elections before redistricting again in the Texas House. Would y'all be open to pushing a nonpartisan redistricting system in Texas if Democrats regain control? Or would you rather go the gerrymandering the other way? And more so around messaging and strategy, do you think that would resonate with your constituents? And even something like speaking to folks on both sides of the aisle as far as like ending Citizens United and other types of, I would say, more progressive strategies to messaging. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Donna Howard every session files a bill to create a nonpartisan redistricting committee. And I think that's what most Texans, that's what most Americans want. I do think it speaks to the corruption issue that we are plagued with in this state and probably in this country. When you have politicians deciding who their voters are, there's something corrupt at the core of that. Same thing with Citizens United, right? When we have corporations being able to influence our politics, the amount of money that we saw from the billionaires in this election cycle makes it really hard to have faith in our political system. And so I think it's just part of a good government, cleaning up government agenda that I'm glad you raised it, because I do think it resonates across party lines.
Yeah, and I'm a yes as well. Excited to support Representative Howard's legislation yet again. But I believed that before I went through a redistricting session, and it is amazing how much going through a redistricting session strengthened my view that we are terrible at this. And there's the partisan element of it, but there's also a nonpartisan element of it that just gets petty. Like, I remember looking at a map and being like, why on earth is there that little like weird hook around like 2 blocks? And the person said, oh, last redistricting cycle, the incumbent thought there was somebody in that district that was going to run against them, so they put him in their neighbors. Like, there's just silly things that happen, and it is bad policy and bad for Texans. And then on money in politics, you know, Citizens United, we unfortunately can't fix at the state level, but we have no campaign contribution limits in Texas. One of y'all could write me $1 million check right now, and I could take it. And that happens. That happens. The lieutenant governor got, I think, $1 million in contribution, $2 million in loans from a pro-Paxton donor right before he sat over the impeachment trial. And I've personally filed legislation to establish campaign contribution limits. I think that is an issue people support, and I think it's something we need to be really loud about and put pressure on.
And to be clear, the biggest policy issue that we've been fighting over in Texas, vouchers, came with a $5 million check from an out-of-state billionaire, Jeff Yaz, to our governor. Something really wrong about that.
All right, well, we'll call that a wrap. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to Representative Hinojosa, Representative Zwiener. We really appreciate your time. Good luck in the next session. And thank you guys for coming.